very big tax. Because there was now something you own, and it could be taxed. And a very big tax, but the tax goes to buy replenishment in the groundwater basin. And one of my doctoral students who did his law degree before coming back for political science, a PhD, is now going back, and Bill Bloomquist went back in 1980s. And now he's going back now, and we have a 50, 60 year period to look at well, what's happened over time. And lots of people moving in, all sorts of problems, water from the north being cut off in some places. And yet in that basin, the withdrawal patterns are very close to the agreement, very close. And that's, I'm going to encourage all of you, when you have seen something that was done 10, 15 years ago, and there was a good study of it, but nothing's been done recently. Those are good studies for masters or PhD. What we need is to understand not just static, X time, but how does something evolve and develop over time? And so he isn't at there's no one at UCLA Law School that I think knows very much about it, but I'll show you some of the references.
I had a question about, it deals with, well, my focus of it deals with Chesapeake Bay, which is the problem with national regulations limiting pollution within it. And a lot of the problem, I believe, is trying to differentiate between point and non-point pollution. And when you have private farms that supply large corporations, how do you fairly and economically distinguish them?
Rough, no question. So, a lot of the problems that we're dealing with are not quick answer problems, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be addressed. But it's how do you get the fora? So how do you get farmer organizations? See, I don't know what kind of farmer organizations there are today.
Well, specifically with chicken farms, their runoff has...
Yeah, there's a lot of
it. Goes right into the Chesapeake, and it's hard to tell who's accountable for it since it's all private farms, but since they supply this large organization with their, I guess, product. So the company wants to say it's really the private farm, so it's not a point, it's a non-point problem. And then the private farmers don't want to be held responsible because they're saying, well, we're really supplying this large corporation.
No, and see, this is where it's in the private market, quote unquote, but there are externalities. So I should have, when I said I'm a free marketeer, it's where you're dealing with processes with few externalities. There's hardly anything in the world that doesn't have some, but few. So this is exactly, I was flabbergasted. About 10 years ago, I was taken to a far west Arizona beef growing area on cattle, and the piles of manure there were just because they were bringing in people. They had they melt them with machines, so that it was just a giant big production process, and the amount of fertilizer there was just immense. And in the old days, if you had a few chickens or a few beef on an individual farm, you took the manure and you used it. Vincent was a farm boy, and they put manure over in piles so that it can stabilize, and they take the old stuff when they were trying to get the soil in better condition. But in these huge places, you can't do that. And then it's how can you get the participants together to say, all right, folks, we're in a knee-jerk, long-term, horrible conflict. Let's get the 2 or 3 or 4 ways we could do this out on the table so that we can, okay, it shouldn't be all farmers and it shouldn't be all the corp. But if some of it is on the farmers who do this and some is on the Corps, do you divide that up and see if you could go to a equity jurisprudence would be a good case, a type of case that might work. Because part of it's fact-finding and part of it is getting negotiation arenas that help provide ways of sharing costs. And very important, but again, I can't just give you the quick answer, but there are arenas to try to get it out where you get people to say, look, 20 years from now, you don't want to be in a situation where this has not been resolved. And when we face up to it.
Just sort of a comment on that same topic, and sorry if I'm cutting somebody off here, but I looked at some of the Chesapeake Bay issues for a course last semester, and some water quality studies that had been done and some daily loading studies that had been done, and they've actually made a lot of progress on the agricultural end. And the way that they did it was something of a voluntary association method and sort of a polycentric system like we've been talking about. And the common approach has been to, on sort of the state and local level, to help each individual farming operation, particularly the larger ones, develop a nutrient management plan specific to that farm. And because they've developed this and they have a well-structured incentive system that has gotten people to voluntarily be a part of that, they've actually reduced the nutrients coming from just the farms by quite a bit. The farms are well on their way to achieving their goal. And actually the big nutrient problem right now is with urban stormwater runoff, because the science is still being done on urban stormwater runoff to figure out what exactly we can do to treat it, whereas the science is a little more well developed with the farms. So, and maybe it'll be some kind of this polycentric or voluntary system with cities that might be able to help with that.
We don't have to just say wait for total voluntary, but enhancing really good discourse and debate may lead you to come up with a partially mandatory, partially voluntary, but that people agree to. So there's if I've been a part, or I know that I'm an association and the leader of my association's been involved in the bargaining over something, and I trust them, then I'm going to go along with it a lot easier than if I'm in a situation where I think those son of guns, they're anti-farm, they do this, they just impose it on us, and I don't feel very much obligation then. And it's how do we get people involved in governance in such a way that they understand a problem, that they're in it. And yes, the fishermen usually understand it because they're in it. They really see what they're doing. But farmers don't necessarily, because what they're in is a different production process, and it's just an externality that used to be easy to take care of and isn't anymore. And urban is a big problem because it's a huge number of users and factories and everything all in an urban area. It used to be, we just dumped it in the ocean.
Yeah, so really the urban side is, there are some voluntary things you can do. Nobody really does them on any significant scale. And on the farming side, at least in the Chesapeake, there's sort of a public and voluntary sort of mixed system there.
Yeah, I want to jump off your idea of equity jurisprudence. I come from a political theory background, so I'm really concerned about, like, obviously there's a finite number of resources on our planet, and you see issues like water and things like that becoming a globalized issue, and how will the evolution of politics respond to this issue?
Well, the ocean is already. So let's make a distinction between the ocean, the Great Lakes, the Mississippi River, and one of the many lakes up in Wisconsin. The lakes in Wisconsin, most of them are relatively small. Some of them have multiple owners living around, but there are ways of those groups managing a small lake. When you're dealing with the Great Lakes, we have the International Joint Commission, IJC. It is dealing with multiple provinces and multiple states, as well as Canada and the U.S. It so far it's making slow progress, but it's not doing too well. And the real problem again is that some of the big problems are things that people don't realize.